welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today we are going to talk about processing your grief. Yay, finally. Oh my God, Nikki, finally. I know, it's one of those things I keep mentioning in every episode. You have to process your grief. You have to process your grief. Can't get over your grief, you have to process your grief. Well, today I'm going to talk about how to do that. It's an instrumental step, isn't it? Okay. Before we dive in, I just want to say a nice hello to all my new listeners. I have had several friends tell me they passed my podcast on to other people around them in their circles, and that's awesome. Yay. The more people I can reach with this, the better. Again, I'm not making a dime off this podcast, at least not as of right now. So this is all me just trying to spread this message out there that your grief's okay and that you're okay and that grieving is normal. It's just something I'm passionate about and I wanted to share. So there you go. Okay. So grief, processing, something we got to do, right? Am I right? You've heard me say it ad nauseum. You need to process your grief. Well, first of all, what brought me to this was I was taking a very interesting class, or not a class, a webinar one day, and something that popped out to me was the 4 tasks of mourning. I'll just read those real quick. This is from a psychologist, J. William Worden, and this was from a book, and I believe this came out in the 80s, so this is not new. But the 4 tasks of mourning are 1, to accept the reality of the loss. And I think I've mentioned this in a previous, I may have even mentioned these tasks. Talked a lot, you guys. I'm probably going to repeat myself at some point. Get over it. And yeah, so it's like the first step in Alcoholics Anonymous or addiction. You have to accept that, admit and accept that you're an alcoholic or that you have this addiction or you are powerless, blah, blah, blah. But you have to accept the reality of your loss. That's step 1. If you still haven't accepted the fact that you have this loss has happened, whatever it may be, it's going to be hard to move on from there. So accepting that. And you might intellectually understand that, like, yes, this person is dead, but you still might have some disbelief. So working through that and accepting it. Number 2 is processing the pain or the grief. Number 3 is adjusting to a world without the deceased. And number 4, find an enduring connection with the deceased in the midst of embarking on a new life. That is a very fancy word of saying learning how to live your new life without whatever it was you have lost. All right, so processing grief. Yeah, it's the thing you got to do, right? You're like, Nikki, get on with it. I'm drawing it out, okay? Anyway, so we've talked about types of grief, common cause of grief, because it's not always just someone in your immediate circle has died. Mom, dad, spouse, child, sibling. We've said there's all sorts of types of grief out there. It could be loss of a job. A lot of people suffered grief when we all went into isolation during COVID. Miscarriages, divorce, empty nest syndrome, when your children have moved out and you're suddenly alone in your home with your spouse, and you haven't been alone with your spouse for a long time, but grieving that your children are grown. Diagnosis of an illness, pet loss. We've talked about these different types of losses. So we all know that there's all sorts of different types of grief out there, and it takes time to get through it, and you're never going to get over it. I've said that before. So what we're going to talk about today is just normal grief or uncomplicated grief. And I know there's no such thing as normal grief, but I'm using that in the psychological sense of it is not a complicated grief, which is something we'll get into another time. But there are different types of grief. Like I've mentioned a few. There's anticipatory grief. We had a whole episode on that. Disenfranchised grief. I had a whole episode on that. Delayed grief. I believe I've talked about that. Complicated grief. And I don't think I've had an episode on that, and I will. So cumulative grief. There's tons of different types of griefs out there, but we're just talking about your normal. And again, I'm using that term loosely. There's no such thing as normal grieving. Everybody, whatever you're feeling is normal. It's normal. But if we want to get technical about it, The American Psychological Association blah, 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 defines this as grief that lasts 6 months to 2 years following the loss. Okay, so that's what normal grief is, if we're going to use the technical definition. Again, if you're not over it in 2 years, it's okay. Doesn't mean you're not normal. Doesn't mean you're crazy. All right, so how do we process our grief? Get on with it, Nikki. First thing you have to do is understand your grief and know what type of grief you're feeling. And this might take a little bit of work on your behalf to go through some of these types of grief that I have mentioned and see what, might be fitting you. Or if this is just standard, so-and-so is gone, such and such is gone, this thing has happened, this loss occurred, and I am sad. That's perfectly okay too. But once you've realized what type of grief you're processing, there are a couple different types of grieving styles. So understanding which one is yours and which one you identify with more can really help you in this process. So there's really 2 styles of grieving. We're going to talk about that super quick and then we'll move on. There's intuitive grief, which is, I hate to say this, intuitive grief is one of those griefs that is stereotypically seen as how women grieve, and I hate putting genders on stuff. It really irritates the crap out of me. But this is just, in everything I've read, it said this is stereotypical generalizations of the way women grieve. Strong, effective reactions, huge waves of powerful emotions, and expressions that mirror those feelings. Kind of an open book grief, if you will. And then there's instrumental grief. This is, again, I don't like putting genders on these things. So, you know what? I'm not even going to say this is, I'm saying it, but this is usually associated with the, quote, more masculine way of grieving. This stuff irritates me. We're not putting genders on this. There's intuitive and instrumental grief. It doesn't matter what gender you are. You might have one or the other. Instrumental grief is more thinking than feeling. It's more of an inward, like not intuitive because that was the first one, more of a quiet process. You're not expressing your emotions outwardly as much. It's been said in a couple of these articles, it's more of a physical expression, but it's not. Okay, let me just give an example. My father died and I had no control over that. But I do have control over fixing up this house. So I'm going to start tearing down this wall and rebuilding the foundation and replacing these windows on my own because dang it, that's what I'm going to do right now. It's using some kind of physical manifestation to express your grief when you are not expressing it through your emotions. And neither one of these are right or wrong, you guys. These are just ways people grieve. These are the 2 different types. Neither one of them are right or wrong, okay? Cool. But instrumental grief is more inward. Intuitive grief is more outward. Okay? All right. So now that you know what you are and which one you identify with, do not put gender onto that. If you're female and you're more the instrumental, fine. I am. God knows I am. I clean the house when I'm really upset about things. I have to do things that I can control because I cannot stand not being in control. Okay, so now we know what type of griever we are. Next, you need to clarify what you need from your grief processing, from your journey. What do you need? What is it you are looking for in your grief processing? We'll call it a grief journey. What is it you're looking for in this grief journey? Are you looking for just the pain to ease up? Are you looking for a way to remember this loss, be it a person, a thing, a pet, whatever? Are you looking for a way to help others who might be grieving too? Just what is it you need? What is it you're looking for? What is your end result? And this is something I work with clients as a grief coach, is to really kind of sit down and envision what you want yourself to be. Because if you're looking for help, if you're realizing you need to process your grief, it's because you're in a place you don't want to be in. It's because you're hurting too much. Where is it you envision you want to be? What do you want? If everything were, you cannot bring your loved one back, you cannot bring back the loss you had, but how do you envision your life being quote unquote better? Now, one thing to keep in mind throughout this entire process is if you are grieving a loss that others have suffered as well, like a death, just keep in mind that the people around you that are also grieving this loss are not going to process their grief the same as you, and that's okay. If you have found a way that has just worked wonders and you feel so much better, great. Don't force that on other people. Let other people grieve in their own way. Okay? Just saying. I just got to throw that caveat in there. Okay. Now, how to process your grief. I'm getting there. I'm here. You guys, we're here. So let's just break this down into 3 steps. 3 bits, as it were. And I kind of said this already. Describe your loss. Write it out if you want to, or sit down and talk it out with somebody. What is the loss you've had? Name it, accept it. We're going to use an example of your spouse died. Okay? My spouse is gone. My spouse is gone. Now, what are the other losses besides just your spouse? What is it you're grieving? Any associated loss are an important part of this, right? So let's say, you've lost your spouse. You've lost a second income to your house or into your household. So now money's going to be tight. You've lost your best friend. You don't have anybody you feel you can talk to. You've lost companionship. You've lost a father or a mother to your children. You're now a single parent. There's just sitting down and thinking of all the losses you have, which can be overwhelming. Don't do this all at once. And don't do this too quickly. Don't do this the day after the loss has occurred if you are not ready. Give yourself time to do this. You need to be ready to process your grief. Sometimes you need to just dwell in it for a while. Said that. That's okay. So what did you love about this person? What is it you've lost in that person? What in the relationship, like we're just using the spouse as an example, but what is it about that spouse that you loved so much? What is it that is now not there that you are grieving? Is it the way they made you laugh? Is it the way they made coffee in the morning? Is it the way they listened to you and just the way they wore that same stupid gray sweater every day? I don't know. Just really think about what it is you loved about that person. Who have I lost also as a result of this loss? What are the extending losses? Have I lost some of his friends, our friends? And then what can I not do now because of this loss, right? What really effectively is gone? What can I no longer actively do? Well, you can't cuddle that person anymore. You can't hug that person anymore. If it's a job, you can't go to that job anymore. If it's a home that's burned down, you can't be in that house anymore. What physically can you not have or do because of this loss? Okay? So once you have everything kind of mapped out as to what all is gone, again, this first step is hard. This is really hard, you guys, and it can be super painful. So take your time with this one. Do not rush through it. And if you write one thing down and it opens up a floodgate, wait a week before you come back to this. Wait until you're ready. Really take your time with this one because this is hard and it's painful. Okay. So the next step, what's different? Who are you now as a person? What is different in your life? Really just explore, especially if this is a significant loss, like a loss of a spouse. And again, this is just an example. You can put in any other loss here, the loss of a parent or a child, obviously, are going to be losses as well. But you're going to be a different person. There's just no two ways around that. What is it about you that is different now? And take your time with each one of these is going to take time. It might take you an afternoon. It might take you a month. It might take you several months. It could take you a year for each one of these steps. Whatever the time limit is fine. But really explore who you are. What's different about you? How are you a different person? What in your life is different? And be honest with yourself about it. How different, like let's say this is the loss of a job. Okay, how are you as a person different because of this loss or the loss of a home? What is it about you as a person now that is different? And I'm not saying that whatever you're feeling is wrong because it's not. These are still big losses. It doesn't have to be a death loss. Losses like these can still affect your life. They're real. We know this. But who are you now as a person? What is different? What are you holding on to that might no longer serve this new you? What do you have that you no longer need. And these are, whatever your answers are going to be yours. And they're all going to be different. And again, if other people are grieving the same loss, their answers are going to be different too. That's okay. Whatever is yours. We're working on you. Now, the last step is something I've talked about a lot as a coach, is envisioning your future life. What do you envision your future to look like? Now that you recognize this loss has occurred, this person, this thing, this whatever, it's gone. It's not coming back. What do you envision your future life to be without that? And be honest with yourself. Don't envision something too far-fetched, Be honest. You still have this hole in your life. This loss is still there, but what is your future like with that loss? You're going to have to take that time to acknowledge the loss, accept it, and exploring your differences in who you are and what life is like now. So taking all that into account, what are you envisioning your future to be? What do you want it to be? And be bold. You're a different person now. What can that be? What can that bring to the world? I've talked a lot about people who use their grief to help others who are grieving similar losses. I've known plenty of people that start support groups, or, they start a very dear friend of mine lost her mother, and she started, I'm going to shout out Marianne a lot on this show because she's an amazing human being. She lost her mother to ovarian cancer, and she began the Ovarian Cancer Alliance of Ohio. That's huge. They spread so much education because ovarian cancer is one of those blind cancers. There's no real test for it, and a lot of people don't know they have it until it's too late. So she's made it her mission to educate the world on what ovarian cancer is and the signs, symptoms, and how to detect it early enough that it can be managed, right? Is that something you want to do? And if it's not, that's okay. Maybe you don't. Maybe you never want to think about this loss again. Let's say you lost a parent to dementia, and you don't want to be an advocate for dementia. You don't want to think about dementia ever again. Great. That's fine. That is okay. You don't have to. You do whatever is good for you, okay? Just envision your future life. What will you, and that's part of coaching in general. And I know life coaching is getting a bad rep. And you know what? I saw a life coach. She got me to where I am today, and she was instrumental in me changing my life. But that's part of it, is imagining what you want out of life, and then what can you do right now to make that happen, even if it's a small step. Okay? So that's it. It's really just a matter of accepting your loss, looking at it, looking at yourself, and looking at where you want to go. How do you want this grief to be part of your life? Because it's going to be. And I've said there's no bad way to grieve, but I will always caution you to not deny your grief and to not ignore your grief. To not try to pretend it's not there, because it is. Okay? So that's really it. How long should you be working on this? Again, that's up to you. This might take you, it depends on the type of person. Some people might work through their grief in a week. They might be like, all right, feeling a heck of a lot better about things. I've accepted this loss. I know who I am as a person and where I'm going. Some people might take them years. I'm a slow griever. It takes me a long time to get over things. Well, like I said, you don't get over them. It's been well over a year, and I still grieve the loss of my cat every single day. I was laying on the couch last night watching TV, and I cried. I cried because I missed that stupid cat so much. She was, anyway, part of me doesn't miss that cat. She was a pain. And see, that's something that's normal too. I've said, if you feel relief when somebody's gone, that's normal. Don't beat yourself up over stuff like that. It was her time. She had to go, and I recognize that. Doesn't mean I can't miss her still. Anyway. Well, that's about it, you guys. I really hope that this helped in some way. If it didn't, I'm sorry. But if it did, wonderful. That's good to hear, And please, I keep saying it, reach out to me. Tell me you hate my podcast. Tell me you love my podcast. I'd rather hear that. Anyway, all right. Before I go on to that, let's get our death deck in. All right. It's time for the death deck. Anyway, so death deck. I'm shuffling up the cards right now. And I'm going to grab one at random. Oh, okay. This is good. This is good. This is good. Regarding your important documents, your will, your life insurance, healthcare directives, etc. This is assuming you have them. A, my family knows exactly where they are and where to find them. B, they are filed together and should be easy to find. C, they may or may not exist. Good luck. So that's something I hound on people. Get your paperwork together. I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you're 18. You are not guaranteed tomorrow. Get your advance directives in order. You might get hit by a bus and be in a coma and you can't make decisions for yourself. What's going to happen? You need to have that together. So get your advance directives together. And along with that, make sure people know where they are. They're not going to do much good if they're in a drawer that you've never told anybody about. Anyway, get your advance directives together. Mine are, my husband, I remind him every few months, this is where my documentation is for my living will, final will, power of attorney, etc. So he knows where it is all the time. I'm forever reminding him. I also have them scanned in a Dropbox that I have shared with a few close friends and family. I recommend doing that. Have a online file of some of this important paperwork and a list of phone numbers for people to call if something happens to you. Okay, that's another topic for another day. Think about that. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please, 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 please tell people about my podcast. Again, I'm not making a penny off this, but I just want people to not feel so alone in their grief because I have, and it sucks. So, yeah. Check me out on Patreon. Again, every penny I make from Patreon is put into a fund so that I can provide pro bono work to people who cannot afford it. I'll give you a shout out on this podcast. I'll say your name out loud on this podcast. And depending on what tier you sign up for, you might get some other stuff too. All right. Thanks, guys. Tell your friends and family. Rate this show on Apple Podcast. Apparently, that's a good way for me to get seen. So do that. Remember, your grief is your own. Your feelings are valid. Your grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief was brought to you by me. You can find me online at nikkithedeathdoula.com. Today's episode was produced by me. Research and scripts written by me. Your host is me. Editing and sound design also me. Music is not me. Music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. License information can be found at filmmusic.io/standard-license. Special thank you to my best friend and husband for constantly reassuring me that I don't suck.